She did not cry when they laughed. She wanted to. Lord knows she wanted to. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the key, that rusted, ugly little key Henry Caldwell had pressed into her palm like it was a joke. Like she was the joke. 23 people standing in the dirt of Dust Creek, Wyoming, laughing at the fat girl from Missouri who thought she could make something out of nothing. But Abigail Whitmore did not cry. She pressed that key against her chest, breathed in, and walked through that broken door alone. If this story speaks to your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow Abigail's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 arrived in Dust Creek, Wyoming, the way bad news always did, without warning and without mercy. The town sat low in a valley between two ridgelines, the kind of place where the wind came down off the mountains with an opinion about everything and everybody. There were 3 saloons, a general store, a livery, a church. Nobody attended regularly, and one boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Claremont, who had opinions about women traveling alone that she shared freely and without invitation. The population hovered around 300 souls, give or take whoever was passing through on their way to somewhere better. It was not a gentle town. It never had been. And on the morning of June the 3rd, it was not gentle at all. Henry Caldwell stood outside the old Greer property at the far end of Sycamore Street, thumbs hooked in his vest pockets, wearing the particular smile of a man who has arranged something he finds privately hilarious. He was 61 years old, thick through the middle, with the red face of a man who drank more than he admitted, and the confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered to him. Beside him stood most of the town, not because they had been invited exactly. But word had gotten around that Henry Caldwell was finally going to do something about the old Greer place, and in a town with 3 saloons, and not much else to occupy a Tuesday morning that counted as entertainment. The property was a disaster. Anyone with eyes could see it. The roof of the main house had partially caved in on the left side. The front door hung at a sorrowful angle on one hinge. The 2 windows facing the street had been boarded over years ago, the boards now warped and splitting, and someone at some point had started a fire in the kitchen that had scorched the back wall black from floor to ceiling. The porch boards were rotted through in 3 places. The well cover was broken. The small barn behind the house leaned to the right as if it were tired of standing. Henry had inherited the property from his brother-in-law 2 years back and had not touched it once. It cost him nothing to leave it sitting. It amused him slightly to own something he did not have to think about. Until that morning. Until Abigail Whitmore stepped off the eastbound stage with 2 leather bags, a tin box, and a look on her face that said she had already made up her mind about something. She was 26 years old. She was from a small town outside St. Joseph, Missouri. She had brown hair the color of creek water in autumn, thick and long, and pinned up under a blue traveling bonnet that had seen better years. Her face was round and soft with dark eyes that moved over everything carefully, the way a person looks when they are trying to memorize a place before it has a chance to disappoint them. She was a large woman, not just tall, but full, through the hips and shoulders. The kind of figure that certain people in certain places had made it their personal business to comment on since she was old enough to understand what comments meant. She had spent the last 3 days on that stage. She had eaten almost nothing. She had slept sitting upright against a window that rattled all night and let the cold in. She had read and reread the letter she had sent to Henry Caldwell 6 weeks prior, and his reply, and the advertisement she had clipped from the back of the Missouri Farmer's Gazette that had said in 14 words everything she had needed to hear. Property for sale or lease, Dust Creek, Wyo. Fixer. Motivated seller. Inquire H. Caldwell. She had written to him before she had quite decided. She had received his reply before she fully understood she was already decided. And she had packed her 2 bags and her tin box and sold every other thing she owned in a Sunday afternoon yard sale on her landlord's back porch. People had told her she was foolish. Her cousin Ruth had said, "Abby, you don't know a soul out there." Her former employer, Mr. Demarest, had said, "A woman alone and well, forgive me, Abby, but a woman in your condition going west, that is not sensible." The man who had courted her briefly 2 years prior, a schoolteacher named Gerald Finch, who had ultimately chosen a slender woman from his congregation had run into her on the street the week before she left, and had said with what he clearly believed was great kindness, "I do hope you find what you're looking for, Abigail. Somewhere out there, I'm sure is a place where a woman like you can do some good." She had smiled at all of them. She had thanked them for their concern. She had gone home and finished packing. She was not running away from something. She was walking toward it. She just needed people to stop assuming she couldn't tell the difference. Henry Caldwell saw her coming down the main street with her 2 bags and knew immediately she was the one who'd written the letter. He'd expected someone older, possibly someone desperate-looking. What he had not expected was the particular way she carried herself. Not elegant, exactly, not refined, but steady. Like a person who had decided not to apologize for taking up space and had been practicing that decision long enough that it had started to stick. He pushed himself off the fence post he'd been leaning on and crossed his arms. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Caldwell." She set one bag down and shook his hand. Her grip was firm. He seemed mildly surprised by that. "Thank you for meeting me. Wasn't much of a trip." He glanced at the people who had begun to gather the way people in small towns gather when anything unusual presents itself. A few men from the saloon, Mrs. Claremont from the boarding house, the Dunmore sisters from the millinery, who had paused with their shopping baskets and were watching with open curiosity. A handful of children who had been shooed away twice already and had simply come back. "Well," Henry said. He produced a key from his vest pocket. It was old. It was rusted. It was quite possibly the most defeated-looking key Abigail had ever seen. "Here she is." He gestured toward the property. Abigail looked at it. She had expected it to be rough. The advertisement had said fixer. She was a practical woman. She had prepared herself. She had not quite prepared herself for this. There was a long silence. Henry let it sit there. She would later understand a man who enjoyed silences that were uncomfortable for other people. "Well," he said. "It's a fixer," she said. Someone in the crowd laughed. Not loudly, just a small, involuntary sound, the kind that escapes a person before they've decided whether they mean it. But it was enough. Once one person laughed, 2 more did, and then it became the kind of laughter that a crowd performs because it wants to be part of something, even something small and mean. Henry smiled. Not at Abigail. At the crowd. At the joke of it. "You really think," he said, turning back to her slowly, letting everyone hear him clearly, "a girl like you can make something out of a place like this?" The laughter settled. Everybody was listening now. Abigail looked at Henry Caldwell for a moment. She looked at the key in his hand. She looked at the broken-down house at the end of the street. Then she looked at the crowd. She did not look the way they expected her to look. She did not look ashamed or frightened or close to tears. She looked considered, like she was working through something in her head that the rest of them weren't privy to. She reached out and took the key from Henry's hand. "I reckon we'll find out," she said. She picked up her bag and walked toward the house. There were a few more laughs. Someone made a comment she didn't quite catch, but whose tone she understood perfectly. Mrs. Claremont said something to the Dunmore sisters in a low voice, and both of them looked at Abigail's back with the particular expression of women who have already written off another woman before giving her a fair chance. Henry Caldwell called after her. "Terms are in the letter, Miss Whitmore. 4 months. If you ain't made it livable and profitable by October 1st, property reverts to me, no compensation." She raised one hand without turning around. Whether it was acknowledgement or dismissal, nobody could quite tell. She pushed through the broken door. It gave way with a groan. She went inside. The first thing she did was open every boarded window she could reach. Not because she needed the light, though she did, but because she needed to breathe, and she needed a moment alone where nobody could watch her face, and the physical act of working gave her hands something to do, while her heart did what it needed to do quietly and privately. Because it was bad. It was genuinely, seriously bad. The kitchen at the back of the house was the worst of it. The fire that had scorched the wall had also taken out most of the shelving on that side, and whatever had been stored there. Flour oil, she didn't know, had left a residue on the remaining floorboards that had attracted years of grime. The cast iron stove was intact, which was something, but the flue was blocked, which meant she couldn't use it until someone cleared it. The counter surface along the right wall had warped so badly it bowed in the middle. One of the legs on the old work table was broken clean through, and someone had propped it up with a stack of bricks that had since shifted. She stood in the middle of it. She breathed. You knew it would be hard, she told herself. You chose hard on purpose. Hard is the only thing that ever amounted to anything. She put her tin box on the least warped section of counter. She opened it. Inside, $12.40 in folded bills. A small journal. A folded recipe written in her mother's handwriting for biscuits, the corners soft with handling. A photograph of herself and her sister Clara, taken 4 years ago, the summer before Clara married and moved to Kansas. A bone-handled knife that had been her father's. She closed the tin box. She took off her bonnet. She rolled up her sleeves. She went to find a broom. She did not sleep in the house that first night. The smell was too heavy and the roof too uncertain. She paid Mrs. Claremont for a single room, endured the woman's pointed commentary about the foolishness of the venture, and was asleep before 9 o'clock. She was back at the property by 5 the next morning. For 3 days, she cleaned. Not one person stopped to offer help. Several stopped to observe. The Dunmore sisters walked past twice on the second day, slowing down in a way that was too deliberate to be accidental, talking to each other in voices just loud enough for Abigail to hear snippets. Can't imagine what she thinks she's... And, a restaurant her. You'd think she'd... A man outside the saloon called out on the third afternoon. Hey there, big girl. You sure you don't need a hand or two, or maybe a whole crew? His friends laughed. Abigail was on the porch with a bucket and a brush. She did not look up. She did not respond. She kept scrubbing. That night she wrote in her journal, Day 3. Flue is still blocked. Need to find someone to clear it. Cannot do it alone. Counter on right side needs full replacement, not repair. Floor in kitchen is salvageable if I sand it down. Started on the windows. The main door needs a new hinge and a new crossbar. Have spent $1.80 on supplies. Have $10.60 remaining. Will need income within 3 weeks or this becomes impossible. She did not write about the laughter. She did not write about Mrs. Claremont's face at breakfast. She did not write about the way Henry Caldwell had stood across the street that afternoon and watched her working with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite curiosity, but something unpleasant in between. She only wrote facts, problems and solutions, what needed doing and how she would do it. It was a habit she had developed young, when the world around her had been unkind in ways she could not change, and the only power she had was over her own response to it. On the fourth morning, an old man named Elias Pratt appeared at the property gate. He was perhaps 70, with a white beard that had gone slightly yellow at the ends, and hands that looked like they had built half the territory. He walked with a cane, but held it like he was doing it a favor rather than the other way around. You the one trying to open a kitchen, he said. Abigail was carrying 2 boards from the back of the lot. She set them down. Yes, sir, she said. Abigail Whitmore. Elias Pratt. I used to do carpentry work in this town before my hip went bad. He looked at the house. What you done so far ain't half wrong. Thank you. Your flue's blocked with a bird nest and about 9 years of debris, he said. I can't climb up to clear it, but I can tell you exactly how to do it if you ain't afraid of heights. She was afraid of heights. She had been afraid of heights since she was 7 years old and fell out of a maple tree and broke her left wrist. I'm not afraid of heights, she said. He gave her a look that suggested he did not entirely believe her. Come back tomorrow morning, she said. I'll have coffee. He came back the next morning. She did not yet have a functioning stove, so the coffee was made over a fire she'd built in the yard in a pot she'd borrowed from Mrs. Claremont's kitchen in exchange for cleaning the woman's storeroom. It was not elegant coffee, but it was hot and strong, and Elias Pratt drank 2 cups and told her how to clear the flue. She cleared the flue. It took the better part of a morning and left her black from the elbows up and shaking from the effort of being on a ladder for 2 hours when every part of her was screaming to come down. When she finally descended, Elias was sitting on the porch step watching her. "You don't quit," he said. It was not quite a compliment. It was more like an observation made by a man revising an earlier assumption. "Not if I can help it," she said. She cleaned herself up at the well, changed into her second dress, and lit the stove for the first time. It drew perfectly. She stood in front of it with both hands pressed flat on the stovetop, and felt something shift in her chest. Not triumph exactly, but the solid, quiet satisfaction of a thing accomplished that people said could not be accomplished. It felt like the first stone laid in a foundation, like the first word written in a language you'd been trying to learn for a long time. She thought, "This is going to work. It is going to be hard, and people are going to be unkind, and I am going to be frightened more than I'll admit, but it is going to work." She thought, "I have to make it work." She thought, "Because I have nothing to go back to, and I've known for a long time that going back was never really an option anyway." By the end of the second week, she had a functioning stove, a repaired counter, new boards on the porch, and a door that opened and closed without incident. The window on the left side of the front room was still boarded. She hadn't gotten to it yet, but both kitchen windows were clear, and when the afternoon light came through them and fell across the cleaned floor, the room looked almost like something, almost like a place where a person might want to be. She had spent $4.20 and had $6.40 left. She had 1 week before she needed to start generating income or begin rationing. She baked biscuits on a Sunday and carried a basket of them to the end of the street and stood there. "Good morning," she said to the first person who walked by, a ranch hand named Collins, who was heading to the livery. "I'm Abigail Whitmore. I'm opening a kitchen at the old Greer property. Would you like a biscuit?" He stopped. He looked at the biscuits. He looked at her. "Free," he said. "Today," she said. "Today they're free." He took one. He bit into it. He chewed. He looked at her again with a different expression. "Ma'am," he said, "that is the best biscuit I have eaten since my mother's table in Tennessee." "Thank you," she said. "Tell your friends." By noon she had given away the entire basket and collected the names and approximate appetites of 11 men who said they'd pay for breakfast if she was open by Monday. She was open by Monday. The first week was hard in ways she had anticipated and hard in ways she had not. She had anticipated the physical exhaustion rising at 4, cooking from 5, serving from 6 to noon, then cleaning, then purchasing supplies, then cooking again for the next day, then falling into bed at 10 and lying awake for an hour anyway, because her mind would not stop making lists. She had anticipated the financial tightness, the careful arithmetic of every penny, the specific anxiety of watching her small reserve of cash move in the wrong direction while she waited for it to turn around. She had not anticipated how much it would hurt to watch people look at her. Not everyone was unkind. Collins came back every morning and brought 2 friends, an elderly couple named the Hathaways, who lived at the edge of town and had apparently been surviving on very bad cooking for several years, found their way to her table on the 3rd day and became regulars by the end of the week. A young man named Percy, who worked at the telegraph office and seemed to have no one in the world, started eating there every evening and always said thank you twice, once when she brought his food and once when he left. But the others. The Dunmore sisters came in on Wednesday and sat at the corner table and ordered coffee, and then whispered to each other for the entirety of their visit and left without saying anything about the food one way or another. But Abigail caught the elder Miss Dunmore looking at her with an expression that was equal parts fascination and pity, and somehow the pity was worse than the contempt. A table of men from the logging camp came in on Friday. They were not mean exactly. They were just thoughtless in the way that groups of men can be when they feel no obligation to perform good manners. One of them, a large man with red hair, looked at Abigail for a long moment and then said to the man next to him, at a volume that was clearly calculated, "She sure does know how to cook. I wonder how long she's been practicing." His friend laughed. The others at the table looked away, which was its own kind of answer. Abigail brought their food. She set it down. She said, "Enjoy your meal, gentlemen." She went back into the kitchen and stood very still for 30 seconds and then went back to work. She cried that night, quietly. In her room at Mrs. Claremont's, face pressed into the pillow so no one would hear. Not because of what the man had said. She had heard worse in Missouri. She had heard worse all her life. But because she was tired and tired. People feel things more sharply. And because she was alone in a way she had not let herself fully understand, until that night, in the particular dark of a town that had not yet decided whether to accept her, when all her certainty about the rightness of this choice sat in the corner like a stranger. She wasn't sure she could trust anymore. She was done crying by midnight. She got up, washed her face, and wrote in her journal, "Need more eggs. Need to find a cheaper flour supplier. Must speak to the Hartley Ranch about a possible weekly order. The biscuits are landing well. The soup needs a stronger broth. I think if I can clear $30 by end of month, I will be all right." She went back to sleep. She had been open for 12 days when Nathan Cole came down from the mountain. She did not know who he was. She would not know for another hour. What she knew was this. It was shortly after 7 in the morning, and she had just brought coffee to the Hathaways' table, and she turned around, and there was a man standing in the doorway that had not been there a moment before. He was tall enough that the top of his hat nearly brushed the doorframe, and he was dark with black hair that had grown past his collar and a heavy beard and sun-dark skin. He wore a brown leather vest over shirt that had seen a great deal of country, and he had a gun at his hip that looked like it had been used and maintained and used again, the way a working tool looks rather than an ornament. He stood there. He did not come in. He looked at her in the way a man looks at a place when he is trying to decide whether it is safe. "Good morning," Abigail said. "Come on in. I've got coffee on and eggs if you want them." He looked at the room. At the tables, 3 of them mismatched chairs but clean. At the window with the light coming through. At Collins and his friends in the corner, who had looked up at the newcomer with expressions ranging from mild interest to something more guarded. He came in. He sat at the table farthest from the other men with his back to the wall. She brought him coffee without being asked. He watched her pour it. "What are you eating?" she asked. "Whatever you've got," he said. His voice was low. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. The voice of a man who spoke when he had something to say. "Eggs," she said. "Biscuit, salt pork, and a potato hash if you want it." "All of it," he said. She brought all of it. He ate without speaking, without looking at anyone. He kept his hat on, which in another man might have seemed rude, but in him seemed more like armor, something he wore because the alternative felt too exposed. When he was done, he put 2 coins on the table. "Ma'am," he said. He stood. He pulled the coins toward her side of the table, a deliberate gesture, not the careless drop of a man who has already moved on. "Thank you," Abigail said. He looked at her then, just for a moment. Not the way men usually looked at her, not with the quick assessment that moved over her figure with something like disdain and moved on, but directly at her face. Her eyes. "Good food," he said. He left. Collins leaned across to his friend and murmured something. His friend looked toward the door. "Who was that?" Abigail asked, gathering the dishes. Collins was quiet for a moment. "Nathan Cole," he said. "He live here in town." "No, ma'am." Collins picked up his coffee. "He lives up on the North Ridge. Comes down maybe twice a season for supplies. Don't talk to nobody much." He paused. "Most people find him." He seemed to search for the right word. "Particular." "He seemed fine to me," she said. Collins looked at her. "Yes, ma'am," he said carefully. "I expect he did." Nathan Cole had in fact been watching her for longer than she knew. He had come down from the North Ridge 4 days earlier than he'd planned, because something had driven him down. Not hunger, not necessity, but something he didn't have a word for. Yet, a restlessness that had nothing to do with supplies and everything to do with the thing he'd seen from the ridgeline that he couldn't stop thinking about. He had been up there the day she arrived. He had been watching the town. It was a habit, the same way a man who had learned the hard way to be careful of people, learned to observe them from a distance before committing to proximity when the stage had pulled in and she had stepped down. He'd seen Henry Caldwell cross the street. He'd seen the crowd gather. He had a good eye, and he was high enough that the angle let him see more of the scene than the participants could see of each other. He had watched Henry hand her the key. He had watched the crowd laugh. He had seen her face, not clearly, not at that distance, but he could read posture and stance the way other men read words, and what he read in her was not what he expected. Not collapse. Not the crumpling he had braced himself for the way a person braces without knowing they're bracing. She had stood straighter. She had turned toward the house. He had started to look away. And then he'd seen it. An old woman. Mrs. Hanover he'd find out later. A widow who sold vegetables from her garden and moved slowly because of her bad knee had been standing at the edge of the crowd with a small ceramic birdhouse in one hand and a basket in the other. Somebody's elbow or the general movement of the crowd had knocked the birdhouse. It had fallen. It had not broken, but it had rolled, and the old woman had made a small alarmed sound and started to bend down for it. But Abigail had already bent down. She had picked the birdhouse up. She had handed it to the old woman with both hands, gently the way you hand something back to a person when you understand it matters to them. She had said something he was too far to hear, and the old woman had nodded, and Abigail had smiled at her. And then she had picked up her bag and walked into the house alone. Nathan Cole had sat on the rock he'd been perched on for a long time after that. I was not a sentimental man. He had worked hard at not being a sentimental man because sentiment in his experience was a luxury that cost more than it gave back. He had been burned by it twice and had drawn the logical conclusion. But he kept seeing it. A woman who had just been publicly humiliated in a strange town where she knew no one bending down in the dirt to pick up an old woman's ceramic birdhouse. Not because anyone was watching. Not because it would help her standing. Not because it would change anything about her situation. Because it was what you did. He had come down from the mountain 4 days later. He had walked into her kitchen. He had eaten her food. He had looked at her face, and it was the face of a person who had decided something a long time ago and was not looking for permission. He walked back to his horse. He rode halfway back to the ridge. He stopped. He turned around. He didn't know exactly why. He told himself it was because he needed an additional supply of something, cornmeal perhaps, or salt. He told himself it was practical. He rode back to the old Greer property. She was outside wrestling with a length of fence board that was being uncooperative. "Here," he said. She looked up. If she was surprised to see him, she didn't show it. "Other end," she said. He took the other end. They positioned it. She had a hammer in her belt loop. She drove the nails. He held the board steady. They worked in silence for 10 minutes, setting 3 more boards. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Reckon," he said. "Why'd you come back?" He looked at the fence. He looked at the ridgeline in the distance. He looked at his hands. "Seemed like you could use another pair," he said. She considered that. "You could have just asked if I needed help." "Would you have said yes?" She thought about it. "Probably not," she admitted. "That's why I didn't ask," he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. "Nathan Cole," she said, not looking up from the next board. "Yes," he said. "Abigail Whitmore," she said. "People call me Abby." "I know," he said. She did look up then. "You know my name." "Small town," he said. "Word travels." "What else does word say about me?" I was quiet for a moment. Then, "That you're making a fool of yourself." She held his gaze. "And what do you think?" He picked up the next fence board. "I think," he said, "that people in this town have been wrong about most things I've ever watched them be sure about." She looked at him for another moment. She handed him the hammer. "Hold this," she said. "I'll get more nails." She went inside. Nathan Cole stood in the yard of the most broken-down property in Dust Creek, holding a woman's hammer, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel like leaving. Nathan Cole did not stay that first afternoon. He held her hammer. He set 3 more fence boards, and when she came back out with the nails, he worked beside her in silence until the section was done. Then he handed the hammer back, nodded once, and walked to his horse without ceremony. No goodbye. No explanation. Just the sound of hooves on dry ground, fading up toward the north ridge, and then nothing. Abigail stood in her yard holding the hammer and watched him go. She did not know what to make of him. She was not entirely sure she needed to. She had enough to think about without adding a silent mountain cowboy to the list. She went back inside and started on dinner. But that night, writing in her journal by lamplight, she found herself putting down his words before she meant to. I think people in this town have been wrong about most things I've ever watched them be sure about. She stared at the sentence for a moment. Then she closed the journal and went to sleep. She was at the stove by 4:30 the next morning. The second week of business was harder than the first in one specific way and easier in every other. The specific hard thing was money. She had taken in $11.40 across 7 days of cooking, which was more than she'd expected, and not quite enough. She had spent $9 on supplies, leaving a margin that felt in the dark hours of early morning very thin. One bad day could tip her backward. 2 bad days could end her. She knew this. She held it the way she held most frightening things at arm's length, useful as motivation, dangerous as obsession. The easier things were the people. Collins had started bringing a fourth man to breakfast. The Hathaways came every other day now, and Mrs. Hathaway had with great ceremony offered the opinion that Abigail's biscuits were superior to any she'd eaten since her mother passed, which Abigail received as the high compliment it was intended to be. Percy from the telegraph office had started arriving 5 minutes before she opened, so he could help her carry the bread from the back counter to the front, a service she had not requested and did not need, but accepted, because there was something in his eagerness that reminded her of herself at 17, wanting badly to be useful to someone. The logging men came back on Thursday. The red-haired one was not with them. The 4 who arrived were quieter and ordered without incident. One of them, a young man who introduced himself as Denny, apologized at the end of the meal without being specific in the way young men apologize when they are embarrassed by the behavior of the group they arrived with. "That fella Briggs, ma'am, he don't speak for all of us." "I know," Abigail said. "Thank you, Denny." He left a larger coin than necessary and did not look back, which told her everything she needed to know about the weight he'd been carrying since Thursday. She was not keeping score. She had decided early not to keep score because scorekeeping was a trap. She had seen what it did to people, the gradual calcification, the way resentment settled in the bones until a person was too stiff to reach toward anything new. Her mother had kept score, had kept it faithfully for 30 years, and it had made her into someone Abigail loved deeply and found very difficult to sit with in a quiet room. She would not do that. She would cook. She would work. She would let people make up their own minds. But she was human, and some mornings that was harder to hold on to than others. The morning Henry Caldwell walked in was one of those mornings. It was a Thursday, the start of her 3rd week. She was short a dozen eggs because her supplier had sold to someone else first, and she had made do with what she had. She'd burned the first batch of biscuits slightly, not badly, but enough to notice, and the salt pork had gone faster than expected, which left 3 men at the end of the breakfast hour with a plate that was lighter than what they'd paid for. She'd compensated with extra and a free second coffee. But she felt the shortfall keenly, the way a person who has very small margins feels every imperfection as a potential catastrophe. She was washing dishes when the door opened, and Henry Caldwell walked in, thumbs in his vest pockets, looking around the room with an expression of deliberate assessment. He sat down at the center table, the one she'd positioned specifically because it caught the morning light. She dried her hands and went over. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Coffee." "Sure," he said. He was looking at the walls, at the new boards she'd set in the floor, at the window she'd finally unboarded and cleaned and hung a simple curtain in front of white cotton she'd sewn herself from a remnant she'd found at the dry goods store for 10 cents. She brought the coffee. He wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at her. "Making improvements," he said. "Working on it," she said. "Roof still needs the left section," he said. "I know. That'll cost you." "I know." He sipped his coffee. She waited. She had learned already that Henry Caldwell used silence the way some men used money as leverage, as demonstration of who had more of it, who could afford to wait longer for the other person to fill it. She did not fill it. He looked slightly annoyed. "I got an inquiry," he said finally, from Martin Graves. She knew the name. Martin Graves owned the large saloon and the adjoining dining room. the only proper restaurant in Dust Creek before she'd arrived. She had not yet been inside it. She had heard it described as expensive and mediocre, which was a combination she found professionally offensive. "He wants to know," Henry continued, "if maybe you'd be interested in a different arrangement, working for him, in his kitchen. He pays decent." Abigail looked at him. She knew what this was. She understood it completely, the mechanism, the intention, the way it was being delivered through Henry, as though it were a neutral business proposition rather than what it actually was. "And the property," she said. "Well," Henry said, "the property would revert to my management naturally. Martin's got some thoughts about what else it could be used for." She kept her face still. It took effort. The effort was visible only in the way she shifted her weight just slightly from one foot to the other, a small physical adjustment that was the only concession she would make to the anger moving through her. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I appreciate you passing along Mr. Graves's offer." "It's a good offer," Henry said. "I'm sure it is," she said. "I'll be staying where I am. Can I bring you anything else this morning?" He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, irritation, she thought, but underneath it, something sharper. She had the distinct sense that her refusal had just made something that had been an inconvenience into something else. A project. An intention. "Just the coffee," he said. She brought him a refill she did not charge him for and went back to her dishes. When he was gone, she stood very still for 30 seconds. Then she said out loud to nobody to the empty kitchen. "No." Just that. One word. A decision reaffirmed. She picked up the next dish. She found out what Martin Graves had done 3 days later. It was a Saturday, which would have been her best day. Ranch hands came to town on Saturdays. Miners came down on Saturdays. Saturdays were when people spent money on small pleasures, and a good meal at a fair price was one of the smaller pleasures available in a place like Dust Creek. She had prepared for it. She had gone to the supply store on Friday and tried to purchase an additional 50 pounds of flour, 2 flats of eggs, a bushel of potatoes, and 10 pounds of dried beans. The store owner, a compact man named Jessup, who had until that point been businesslike with her, if not precisely friendly, stood behind his counter and looked at her list and said, "Afraid I can't help you, Miss Whitmore." She looked up from her list. "Pardon. Stock's low," he said. He did not meet her eyes. "Won't have what you're after until Wednesday." She looked at the shelves behind him. They were not low. She could see 4 large flour sacks on the second shelf. She could see crates of eggs stacked near the back wall. "Mr. Jessup," she said carefully, "I can see the flour from here." "That's spoken for," he said. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, miss. Nothing I can do." She stood there. She understood. She understood completely. She thanked him, which she would later think about and not regret, because it had not been for him. It had been for herself, for the person she was choosing to be, even when she wanted badly to be someone different, and she walked out. She went to the dry goods store. Spoken for. She went to the small trading post at the edge of town. Closed, the sign said, though she could see light inside. She went to the livery to ask whether any of the ranchers coming in had spare provisions they'd sell. The liveryman told her he didn't get involved in that kind of thing, which was a new policy, given that she had seen him negotiate exactly that transaction twice in her first week. Martin Graves had moved through this town like a hand sweeping pieces off a board, and she had not seen it coming. And now it was Saturday morning, and she had enough provisions for perhaps 40% of what she'd planned to serve. She walked back to her kitchen. She stood in the middle of it. She breathed. She opened every cabinet. She inventoried everything she had with the focused precision of a general accounting for troops before an impossible engagement. She had 2 pounds of flour, a partial sack of cornmeal, 6 eggs, 3 large potatoes, a jar of preserved peppers she'd brought from Missouri, half a wheel of hard cheese she'd purchased from a passing trader the week before, dried herbs, salt lard, a small amount of dried beef she'd been saving for soup stock, and a jar of honey. She sat down on the work stool. She thought. She got up. She started cooking. When Collins arrived at 6:30 with his usual companions, he stopped in the doorway and sniffed. "What is that?" he said. "Cornbread," she said, "with preserved peppers and hard cheese. Potato cakes with herbs. Dried beef hash with honey glaze. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in." He looked at the table. He looked at her. "Where's the—" he started. "This is what's on the menu today," she said. "If you want it, sit down. If you don't, I understand." Collins sat down. His friends sat down. By 7:30, there were 14 people in her small dining room, and she was out of cornbread and making a second batch, and there was a line outside the door, not long 4 people, but a line which had never happened before. The food was different from what they expected. It was not worse. In some ways, stripped of the usual and forced into the unfamiliar, it was better, bolder, more surprising, the kind of meal that stays with a person because it asked something of them. Denny from the logging camp ate 2 plates of the potato cakes and told the man beside him, "I don't know what she did to these, but I'd ride 20 miles for them." Abigail behind the counter heard him. She held on to that sentence for a long time. She did not cry until after they had all gone home, and even then it was the good kind. That evening, as she was closing, she heard boots on the porch. She looked up. Nathan Cole was standing in the doorway. She had not seen him since the fence boards. That had been 11 days ago. "You're late for dinner," she said. "Heard you had a rough day," he said. She set down the cloth she'd been using to wipe the counter. "How'd you hear that? Town's small," he said. "And Graves is loud when he thinks he's won something." She looked at him. "Did you come to tell me I should have taken his offer?" "No," he said. "Then why'd you come?" He reached behind him and lifted something from the porch. 2 large cloth sacks. He set them on the nearest table. Flour, he said. "Eggs, some cornmeal. I've got a ranch contact up north who doesn't sell to town merchants." He paused. "Sells to me, though." She stared at the sacks. She looked up at him. "How much?" she said. "Straight cost," he said. "No markup. Nathan." "Don't make it a big thing," he said. His voice was flat, but not cold. The flatness of a man who is uncomfortable with gratitude, who has perhaps not received enough of it, to know how to stand in it without flinching. "You needed supplies. I had access to them. It's simple." It was not simple. She knew it was not simple. He had gone out of his way. He had called in a contact. He had loaded these sacks and brought them down from the mountain and onto her porch on a Saturday evening when most men in this territory were in a saloon. "Thank you," she said. She kept her voice even. She gave him the courtesy of not making him watch her feel it. He nodded. "Can I feed you?" she said. He looked at the sacks. "You just got your supplies back." "I know," she said. "Sit down, Nathan." He sat down. She made him the last of the potato cakes and the remaining hash and a cup of coffee. He ate steadily without hurry, the way a man eats when he has been alone all day, and the act of sitting at a table is itself something. She sat across from him when her own work was done. She did not bring food for herself. She would eat later in the kitchen, standing the way she always did when it was just her. But she sat. They were quiet for a while. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "You keep asking me that," he said, "because you keep being worth asking." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, barely, but it did. "Go ahead," he said. "What happened to you?" she said. "That made you live up there alone." The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. But she had decided some time ago that she did not want comfortable if comfortable meant never knowing anything real. He looked at his coffee cup. "Lost my ranch," he said. 6 years ago. Bad deal. Man I trusted decided my trust was a resource he could extract." He turned the cup in his hands. "After that, I didn't see much point in staying in places where the same people who took from you get to stay, and you're the one who leaves." "So you left?" she said. "I left," he said. "Found the ridge. It was quiet up there." He paused. "Still is." "Do you miss it?" she said. "Having a place that was yours." He looked at her for a long moment. "Every day," he said. She nodded, not with pity, with recognition. "Me too," she said. "I never had one to lose, but I miss the idea of it every day." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "That's why I came here. The idea that maybe you could build the thing you never had, that it wasn't too late for that." "You think it ain't," he said. "I think it has to not be," she said. "Because the alternative is sitting still, and I've tried that and it doesn't suit me." He looked at her for a long time after that. Then he said, "Graves ain't done, you know that." "I know," she said. "He'll try again." "I know. You going to be ready?" She met his eyes. "I'm always ready," she said. "I just don't always look it." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Not quite there, but close. Closer than she'd seen from him before. He stood. He put money on the table. "For the meal," he said. "Nathan, you brought me 2 bags of—" "For the meal," he said again. "That was separate." She looked at the coins. She left them where they were. "Good night," she said. "Night," he said. He went out. She sat in the empty room for a while. Then she got up, cleared his plate, and started planning what she would cook tomorrow. The following week she expanded her hours. It was a decision made not from confidence, but from calculation. She needed the income and the breakfast rush, while good was not sufficient on its own. She began serving a midday meal as well. Simple soup bread, whatever she had that was substantial. She put a small board outside the door each morning with the day's offerings. A habit she'd started in the second week, and that had become. She was told a point of orientation for people passing through. They stopped to read it, the way people stop to read a notice board out of habit or hope or simple curiosity. Elias Pratt, who had cleared her flu with his instructions and returned most mornings for coffee, since appointed himself as an informal authority on the quality of the board. "Soup today," he said one morning, studying it with his arms crossed. "Bean and salt pork," she said. "You put the peppers in." "I always put the peppers in." "Then I'll be here at noon," he said. "And I'll bring Winifred." Winifred turned out to be his neighbor, a widow of 73, who arrived in a hat with a silk flower on it that had seen better decades, sat down with enormous dignity, and ate 2 bowls of soup without speaking, except to say at the end, "Young woman, you have a gift." She said it the way people announce an official finding. A verdict, not a compliment. Abigail thanked her. Elias leaned over and whispered, "She hasn't said that to anyone since the previous president." She laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. Nathan came back on Wednesday, not for a meal. He arrived mid-morning with a length of rope and a block and tackle, and without explanation, began rigging something at the back of the property. She watched from the kitchen window for 3 minutes before going out. "What are you doing?" she said. "Your well cover's cracked through," he said. He was threading the rope with the particular efficiency of a man who knows rope well. "If it gives way, you'll lose the bucket and possibly your hand." She looked at the well cover. She had known it was a problem. It had been on her list for 2 weeks, the list of things that needed doing, that she had not yet found time or money to reach. "I was going to fix it," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm fixing it now." She watched him work. "You're here a lot," she said. "For someone who lives on a ridge." "Need more of something," he said, not looking up. "What?" He didn't answer for a moment. Then, "I've been fixing this type of block and tackle wrong for 3 years. Elias showed me the right way. I'm practicing." She stared at him. "You came down a mountain," she said, "to practice a knot." "Block and tackle," he said, "not a knot." "Nathan." He finally looked up. "I like it here," he said, simply, without decoration, the way a man states a fact that has surprised him and that he has decided to stop fighting. She held his gaze for a moment. She did not know what to do with that. She was not sure she was ready to know what to do with it. She was a practical woman with a lot of work and a very small margin, and the feelings that had been building quietly in the background of her days were not something she had time to examine properly. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. He went back to the well cover. She went back to her kitchen, and if she was smiling when she got there, she did not see a reason to stop. The second twist came on a Thursday afternoon, and it came from a direction she had not anticipated. A woman came into the kitchen just after noon, when the last of the midday crowd was finishing. She was perhaps 40, dressed in clothes that were good quality and slightly trail-dusty, with the upright bearing of a woman who had been told all her life that posture communicated character. She sat down at the corner table and looked at the menu board and ordered the soup. Abigail brought it. The woman ate carefully, deliberately. She looked around the room the way a person looks when they are assessing something. Not critically, or not only critically, thoughtfully. When she was done, she said, "You're Miss Whitmore." "I am," said Abigail. "Ida Carroll," said the woman. "I run the Carroll Ranch out on the East Fork. We've got 40 men at peak season." Abigail kept her expression neutral. "That's a good-sized operation." "It is," Ida said. "Our cook left 2 weeks ago. We've been managing on bad food and worse morale, and a hungry ranch hand is a dangerous ranch hand." She looked at Abigail directly. "I'd like you to come cook for us." Abigail sat down across from her. "Full time," she said. "Season," said Ida. "April through September. Good pay, room and board." "I have my own kitchen," Abigail said. "I know," said Ida. "That's why I'm here. A woman who could build this out of that wreck." She nodded toward the window, toward the property, toward the evidence of 4 weeks of relentless work, "is a woman who knows what she's doing." She paused. "But I need full-time Miss Whitmore, and I need an answer this week." Abigail looked at her hands. She thought about what full-time on a ranch meant. Real money. Steady money. No Graves to squeeze her supply lines. No Henry Caldwell watching the calendar. No Saturday mornings, standing in her kitchen, counting eggs, and trying to find a way to make 40% of what she needed, stretched to cover 100% of what was coming through her door. She thought about the curtain she'd hung in the front window, the boards she'd replaced, the stove she'd coaxed back to life. The morning Elias Pratt had watched her come down from the roof and said, "You don't quit," as though he had expected her to. She thought about Nathan Cole saying, "I lost my ranch. After that, I didn't see much point in staying in places where the same people who took from you get to stay, and you're the one who leaves." "Mrs. Carroll," she said, "I'm grateful. I mean that truly. But I can't leave this place." Ida looked at her. "Can't or won't?" "Both," said Abigail. "If I leave now, Graves gets what he's been angling for, and Henry Caldwell gets to laugh about it for the rest of the summer. And I don't—" She stopped. She chose her next words carefully. "I don't want to spend my life working in someone else's kitchen if I can build my own." Ida was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My husband built our ranch on a borrowed horse and a debt he didn't pay off for 11 years. She stood. She straightened her jacket. "If you change your mind, the offer stands for 10 days. She put money on the table, a little more than the soup cost, considerably more. "Keep the difference," she said. "Buy more peppers. Your soup needed them." She walked out. Abigail looked at the money on the table. She looked at the curtain in the window, the floor she'd sanded, the stove she'd fought to bring back. She picked up the money. She put it in her apron pocket. She went back to the kitchen. She did not change her mind. That night, she told Nathan. He had come by in the late afternoon, ostensibly to check the well cover he'd repaired. Actually, she was beginning to understand the pattern because he had developed the habit of being there in the evenings, in the way that some things develop without being decided. She told him about Ida Carroll's offer. She told him what she'd said. She told him why. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "That was a hard thing to turn down." "Yes," she said. "You don't regret it." "Ask me in a month," she said. He looked at her. "Why did you really?" She thought about it. "Because somebody somewhere decided I wasn't built for the hard version of things, that I should take the safe offer and be grateful for it and not ask for more than that." She met his eyes. "I am tired of living inside other people's expectations of my limits." Nathan Cole looked at her for a long, steady moment. "All right," he said quietly. "All right," she said. Neither of them said anything else for a while. Outside, the wind came down off the mountains. the way it always did in the evenings in Wyoming, sudden and cold and clean, carrying the smell of pine, and something older than the town, older than the territory, older than all of them. It moved through the open window and lifted the curtain she had made from a 10-cent remnant, and for a moment, the whole room felt like it was breathing. Nathan Cole looked at the curtain. He looked at her. He looked away out the window at the darkening ridge in the distance. I'm going to be around more, he said. If that's all right. She did not look at him. It's all right, she said. And when he left, she stood at the window and watched the dark shape of him moving toward the edge of town, toward his horse, toward the ridge. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Something she barely remembered the name for, something quiet and terrifying and specific. She felt like someone was coming back to her. She did not know how to hold it yet. But she thought, standing there in the dark, that she was willing to learn. She should have seen it coming. Looking back, the signs had been there, the way Jessup at the supply store had stopped meeting her eyes entirely, the way certain tables that had filled easily in the 4th and 5th weeks now stayed empty on mornings they'd previously been claimed before 6, the way Henry Caldwell had taken to standing across the street on Tuesday afternoons with his arms folded, not doing anything, just standing there watching. She had noticed all of it. She had filed it away. She had told herself she was being careful and practical, and she had kept cooking and kept working and kept telling herself that the work was enough, that the work was always enough. She had been wrong. Martin Graves made his real move on a Monday. Not through the supply lines this time. Not through Henry. He did it the way a man does it when he has decided to stop being subtle. He walked into her kitchen at 7:15 in the morning. During the busiest point of her breakfast service, pulled a chair from the nearest table without asking, turned it around and sat on it backwards, with his arms crossed over the top rail, watching her work. Martin Graves was 54 years old, and had the build of a man who had once been strong and had since converted that muscle to something denser and more settled. He had a full gray mustache and small pale eyes that moved over everything, with the particular assessment of a man who had spent 30 years calculating what things were worth and what they could be made to cost. He sat there for 4 full minutes without speaking. Abigail served 2 tables. She refilled 3 coffees. She brought out a plate of cornbread she'd been keeping warm. She did not look at him. He waited until there was a brief lull, one of those natural pauses that happen in a busy kitchen when one wave of orders has been served and the next hasn't yet arrived, and then he said, "Miss Whitmore." She turned. "Mr. Graves." "Sit down a minute," he said. "I'm working," she said. "It'll wait," he said. She looked at Collins in the corner, who was watching Martin Graves with an expression she couldn't quite read. She looked at Denny, who had started coming to breakfast 3 days a week, and who was now looking at his plate with great intentness. She looked at Elias Pratt, who met her eyes and held them steadily, which was its own kind of answer. She sat down. Not because he told her to, because she wanted to hear what he had decided to say to her face. "You've done all right here," he said. It was the tone of a man complimenting a child on a drawing he privately found unremarkable. "Better than most expected." "Thank you," she said. "But here's the thing." He leaned forward slightly. "You're getting into a position where you're starting to affect other businesses in this town, and that creates friction." "I'm not aware of affecting anyone," she said. "I'm cooking breakfast and lunch, that's all." "You're undercutting my prices," he said. "You're pulling my regulars." She looked at him steadily. "If your regulars are choosing to eat here, Mr. Graves, that's a conversation you might want to have with your kitchen." The silence that followed was of the specific quality of a silence that occurs when a person says something true that the other person to hear said aloud. Martin Graves's jaw tightened, very slightly, but she saw it. "I'm going to make you a final offer," he said. "I'll buy out your lease from Caldwell, pay you fair market for the improvements you've made. You walk away with real money and no debt." "I don't have debt," she said. "You will," he said. "When the well pump fails, and it will, that casing is cracked, and when the left section of that roof comes down in October, and it will. I've had a man look at it, you won't have the capital to fix either. And Caldwell's terms mean the property reverts if you can't maintain it as a viable commercial concern." He spread his hands, the gesture of a man being generous. I'm offering you a clean exit." She did not say anything for a moment. Not because she was considering it. She wasn't considering it. But because she needed 30 seconds to manage the specific fury that was moving through her, not just at the offer, but at the information in it. The fact that he had had a man look at her roof, that he had been measuring her vulnerabilities with the careful attention of someone who intended to use them, and that he had sat down in her kitchen in front of her customers and delivered this as though it were a kindness. "Mr. Graves," she said, "you've been very thorough." "I'm a thorough man," he said. "I can see that." She stood. "My answer is no. If you'd like breakfast before you go, I'm happy to bring it out." He looked up at her. The pale eyes were flat now. The pretense of negotiation, which had never been entirely convincing, dropped away entirely. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," she said, "but it'll be mine." She went back to the kitchen. Behind her she heard the chair scrape back, heard him stand, heard him walk to the door. She did not hear him say anything else, and somehow that was worse than if he had. Collins caught her eye when she came back around the counter. He gave her a small nod. She nodded back. She poured herself half a cup of coffee, which she never did during service, and drank it in 2 swallows, standing at the back counter. Her hands were perfectly steady. She was proud of that. Nathan heard about the visit by noon. He arrived at the kitchen at 1 o'clock when she was in the last stretch of the midday service, and he sat at the back table and waited. She knew why he was there. She could tell by the set of his shoulders the particular stillness of a man holding himself deliberately in check. She brought him coffee when the last of the lunch crowd had gone. He said, "Graves came in this morning." "He did," she said. "I heard what he said to you." She looked at him. "The town really is small." "Denny works for me part-time," Nathan said. "He told me." She sat down. "He made an offer. I said no. That's the whole of it." "That's not the whole of it." Nathan wrapped both hands around the cup. "A man like Graves doesn't make an offer in front of witnesses unless he's already decided what comes after the offer." She looked at him. "What comes after the offer?" "Pressure," Nathan said. "Real pressure. Not the supply lines that was a test to see how you'd bend. You didn't bend the way he expected, so now he knows the only way to move you is to make it impossible to stay." She was quiet for a moment. "The roof," she said. "And the well casing," Nathan said. He wasn't bluffing about either. She looked at him. "You knew about the well casing." Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, but close to it. "I noticed it when I fixed the cover," he said. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." She held his gaze for a long moment. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that it needs fixing before winter," he said. "The roof section." He paused. "I can fix the roof. I've done it before. The casing is more specialized. I know a man in Larimer who does well work. I can get him here." "That costs money," she said. "Yes," he said. "Money I don't have right now," she said. "I know," he said. The silence between them was different from the usual silences. This one had weight in it. The weight of a problem that does not have a clean solution, that requires something from both people, and neither of them can quite say it plainly yet. "Nathan," she said, "I am not a charity case." "I know that," he said immediately. "I'm not this isn't." He stopped. He started again. "I've got money sitting in an account in Cheyenne I haven't touched since I sold off the cattle after I lost the ranch. I've been waiting to find something worth putting it toward." He looked at her directly. "I think I found it." She stared at him. "No," she said. "Abby." "I said no, Nathan. If I take your money and Graves finds out and he finds out everything then. This kitchen stops being mine and starts being yours, and every person in this town who's been waiting for me to fail will say, I couldn't do it without a man's money behind me, and they won't be entirely wrong." He looked at her for a long time. "Then tell me what you need," he said. "That isn't money." She thought about it. "Time," she said. 3 more weeks of income at the current rate gets me close enough to handle the casing. If you can do the roof before October." "I can do the roof in a week," he said. "Then do the roof," she said. "As payment for meals." I'll feed you every day you're working, and we'll call it even." He stared at her. "Abby, a week of roofing is worth considerably more than—" "Take it or leave it," she said. He was quiet. "Take it or leave it," she said again. "I'll take it," he said. He did not look pleased exactly. But underneath the plainness of his expression, something had shifted that she filed away to think about later when she had the private space to do it. "Good," she said. She stood. "Be here at 5:30 Wednesday. I'll have coffee." He stood. He put money on the table for the coffee he hadn't finished. He left. She stood in the empty room and pressed both palms flat on the tabletop and breathed. 3 weeks. She needed 3 good weeks. She went to her board and started rewriting the menu, thinking about how to make the most of what she had, how to make a dollar move further than it wanted to go. She was still writing when the first of the afternoon customers walked in, and she put the board down and smiled and said, "Good afternoon. What can I get you?" She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She was going to need to be better. The first week with Nathan on the roof was its own particular kind of complicated. He arrived at 5:30 Wednesday, as she'd asked, drank his coffee standing up the way he always did when he was thinking about something, and then went up the ladder before she'd even finished her first batch of biscuits. He worked quickly with the economy of motion of a man who has done physical labor his whole life and stopped wasting energy on unnecessary movement somewhere around the age of 20. By the time her breakfast rush was over, he'd cleared the damaged section and was already beginning to set the new boards he'd brought down from the ridge in his wagon that morning. Collins looked at the ceiling one morning and said, "Is that Nathan Cole up on your roof?" "It is," said Abigail. Collins looked at his friends. Something passed between them. Not words, just the specific male communication of a glance that carries a fully formed sentence. She chose not to translate it. "Huh," said Collins. "More coffee," she said. "Please," said Collins. He did not bring it up again, which she appreciated. What she did not anticipate was the effect Nathan's presence had on the room. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing she could point to and name precisely. But something about a man working on the roof, working for her visibly, for reasons that the whole town could see and draw their own conclusions about, changed the way certain people sat in her dining room. Straighter somehow. More deliberate. As though they had quietly reassessed what kind of place this was and found it to be a more serious establishment than they'd initially credited. 3 new faces appeared in the second week. Ranch hands from a spread 10 miles east who'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone else about the potato cakes. They ate in near silence, paid without complaint, and on the way out the tallest one stopped and said, "Ma'am, we'll be back Friday with 4 more. That all right?" "That's very all right," she said. The numbers were moving. Slowly in the right direction, the way small margins move when every decision is correct, and the luck holds, not surging, not transforming, but accumulating. The way water fills a vessel, drop by drop, until the day you look at it and realize it's nearly full. She was almost there. And then Graves moved again. It was a Saturday, her best day now, consistently. The dining room had been full since 6, and she was in the perfect rhythm of a heavy service, that almost wordless efficiency, where her body knew what her hands needed before her mind had caught up, when the door opened and a man she didn't recognize came in and sat down at the center table. He was well dressed. Dark coat, clean boots, a hat he kept on despite being indoors. He had the look of a man who had come from somewhere with more money than Dust Creek and intended you to know it. He ordered coffee. He sat for an hour. He did not order food. He watched the room. She recognized what he was. She had seen his type in Missouri, the man you send ahead to assess a situation, to count heads, and map the territory before the more important man arrives. He was not from Graves. His clothes were too good for Graves, whose money was local and comfortable. This was something else. He left without introducing himself. She told Nathan that evening. "Dark coat," Nathan said. He had been on the roof all day and was drinking his end-of-day coffee with the particular exhaustion of honest physical labor, which looked different from any other kind of tired. Hat on inside. Yes. Nathan set his cup down. "That's a man named Carver," he said. He works for a land company out of Denver. They've been buying up commercial properties in small territories for the last 2 years. He looked at her. Graves must have brought him in. She felt something cold move through her. A land company. They buy the property, convert it, flip it, usually to someone with more capital coming in from outside. He looked at her steadily. Abby, if Graves sells his interest to a Denver land company, the whole board changes. It's not just your supply lines anymore. It gets very complicated very fast. She thought about Henry Caldwell's terms. October 1st. If not livable and profitable. Property reverts. How much time do I have? She said. If Carver reports back to Denver and they move fast. Nathan turned the cup in his hands. 3 weeks, maybe 4. 3 weeks. The same timeline she'd already calculated. But different now. Before 3 weeks had been a financial target. Now it was a countdown. All right, she said. All right, he said. Abby, what do you want me to do? Nathan. She looked at him directly. Not with frustration, not with fear, with the specific clarity of a woman who has decided again the same thing she has always decided and just needs to say it out loud. I'm not leaving, I'm not selling, I'm not taking Graves's offer, and I'm not letting a Denver land company decide what this place is worth. So the question is not whether I stay. The question is how. He looked at her for a long moment. The roof will be done by Wednesday, he said. 4 days ahead of what I said. Thank you, she said. And I'm going to ask Ida Carroll if she'll prepay a month of midday meals for her hands, he said. Don't argue. It's a business arrangement between me and Ida. You provide the meals, she pays up front. I facilitated the introduction. It has nothing to do with your independence. She opened her mouth. Nothing to do with it, he said firmly. I'm a businessman making a referral, that's all. She closed her mouth. She thought about it. And what do you get out of it? She said. He picked up his cup. The satisfaction of watching Graves lose, he said. It was so simple and so honest that she almost laughed. All right, she said. Ask Ida. Ida Carroll said yes before Nathan had finished asking. Tell her I want the noon meal for 20 hands 5 days a week, and I'll pay 6 weeks up front, Ida said. They were standing in the Carroll ranch yard, and Nathan had the distinct impression that Ida had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, and was pleased with herself for having had the patience to let it arrive naturally. And tell her if she can do a Saturday supper as well, I'll throw in extra, he told Abigail. She sat down when he told her. Just for a moment. She sat in the chair by the window and looked at her hands and did the arithmetic, and then looked up at him with an expression that was not tears. He was beginning to understand that tears were not really part of her vocabulary, that she processed things differently, more internally, more privately, but was something adjacent to them, something that lived in the same territory. That covers the well casing, she said quietly. And a month's supplies, he said. She pressed her lips together. She breathed. Nathan, she said. Don't, he said. I have to say something. You don't, he said. I know, that's enough. She looked at him for a long moment. It's not enough, she said. Her voice was low and careful. I want you to know that what you've done here, what you've been doing, it matters. You matter, to me. Not because of the roof or the supply contacts or Ida Carroll. Because of the fence boards on the first day when you just showed up and didn't ask permission. She swallowed. Because of all of it. He was very still. She met his eyes. That's all, she said. I just wanted you to know. He looked at her for so long that she began to wonder if she'd said too much, if she'd cracked something open that was better left sealed, if the careful building of the last weeks was about to shift under the weight of her saying a true thing at the wrong moment. Then he said, I come down from that ridge every morning now, and the first thing I think about is whether your stove's running right. She blinked. That ain't a small thing, he said. For me, that ain't a small thing at all. She understood him. She understood that for a man who had lived alone on a mountain for 6 years, and who protected himself with silence, the way other men protected themselves with walls, saying the first thing I think about is whether your stove's running right was the equivalent of another man writing a poem. I know, she said softly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He picked up his hat. He did not leave immediately. He stood there for another moment, the way he sometimes did, as though the room was something he wanted to hold in his mind, before he stepped out of it. Then he went. She sat there in the quiet for a long time. She pressed her hand flat against the tabletop, the table she'd repaired in the room she'd rebuilt in the place she'd refused to leave, and she felt the solid reality of it under her palm. She thought, "This is mine. They have not taken it, and they will not take it." She thought, "And he comes down from the mountain thinking about my stove." She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel all of it. The fear and the hope and the specific ache of being close to something real after a long time of being very far from it. Then she stood up. She had 20 ranch hands to feed starting Monday. She went to her menu board and started writing. The Saturday it all broke open was 3 weeks later. She had been managing the Carroll order for 15 days, and it had done exactly what the numbers said it would, stabilized her finances enough that the well casing was scheduled. The roof was done, and she had a slim but genuine cushion for the first time since she'd arrived. She was not comfortable. She was not safe in the way she wanted eventually to be safe. But she was viable, and viable was what Caldwell's contract required, and viable was what she had decided to be. She had 23 people in the dining room at 7:15 that morning, the most she had ever had. She had moved the third table from the back wall to the center and added 2 chairs, and it was still barely enough. The noise level was different from her usual mornings, louder, more overlapping, the sound of a place that had acquired a kind of momentum that was carrying itself forward on its own energy rather than being pushed. She was in the kitchen, managing 3 pans and a full pot of coffee, when Percy from the telegraph office came through the back door instead of the front, which he had never done before. She looked up. His face was white. "Percy," she said immediately. "What happened?" He was holding a folded paper. His hands were shaking slightly. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "A wire came this morning, for Mr. Caldwell. I shouldn't be telling you this, but—" He stopped. "I like this place," he said. "I didn't want you to hear it from him." She took the pan off the heat. "Tell me," she said. "Denver Land Company made a formal offer to Caldwell this morning. They're buying his interest in this property." Percy swallowed. "The wire says the deal closes in 10 days. The kitchen was loud with the sounds of service voices from the dining room, the hiss of the other pan, someone laughing at something, and all of it seemed to come from very far away. 10 days, she said. "Yes, ma'am." She stood very still. Her lease was with Caldwell, not with a Denver Land Company, which meant when the land company took ownership, her lease was whatever they decided it was, which meant October 1st, the date she'd been working toward, the target she had been fighting to reach, might not matter at all. "Percy," she said. "Ma'am." "Is Nathan Cole in town today?" "I saw his horse at the livery an hour ago," Percy said. "Find him," she said. "Ask him to come here when he can." Percy nodded. He was already moving toward the door. "Percy," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "Really." He nodded again and went. She turned back to the stove. She put the pan back on the heat. She finished the order. She carried 3 plates to the dining room, and she smiled at the people at the table, and she said, "Sorry for the wait. More coffee, anyone?" And her voice was steady, and her hands were steady, and nobody in that room could have guessed that she was standing in the middle of her own undoing. She had learned a long time ago how to look all right when she wasn't. Nathan arrived within the hour. He came through the front door this time, and he sat at the back table, and he waited while she served the last of the breakfast crowd. She could feel him watching her. Not with urgency, with the focused stillness of a man who has heard something and is working through it from the outside, while she works through it from the inside. When the room was empty, she sat down across from him. "Percy found you," she said. "He did." Nathan's voice was quiet. 10 days. 10 days, she said. "There's a lawyer in Cheyenne," he said. "Daniel Hurst. I've used him. He knows land contract law in this territory better than anyone between here and Denver. If your lease has any clauses about transfer of ownership, and a lot of leases Caldwell drew up, Hurst could potentially block or delay the transfer long enough to... "Nathan," she said. He stopped. She looked at him. "I need you to listen to me for a moment." "I'm listening," he said. I am going to fight this," she said. "I am going to find every legal angle and use every contact I have, and I am going to make this as difficult as possible for Caldwell and Graves and anyone in Denver who thinks this property is an easy acquisition." She kept her eyes on his. "But I need to know something first." "What?" he said. "If I lose it anyway," she said. "If I do everything right and it still doesn't work if they take this place, I need to know I tried. That's all. I need to know the outcome wasn't because I didn't try hard enough." He held her gaze. "You have never," he said very carefully, "not tried hard enough for a single day since you arrived in this town." She breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He reached across the table, not to take her hand, not with any particular deliberateness, but in the way a person reaches when they want to close a distance, when words have run out, and the body knows something the tongue doesn't. His hand rested on the table close to hers. Not touching. Close. "Send for Hurst," she said. "He'll be here in 4 days," Nathan said. "I'll wire him today." She nodded. She stood up. She went to the back and started writing the next day's menu, because tomorrow there were 20 ranch hands coming for noon, and the day after there was a new table of regulars she'd acquired from the East Fork Road, and the day after that was Saturday again, which was always her best day, and none of that stopped because Denver had sent a wire. None of it stopped because someone had decided again that she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be reckoned with. She wrote the menu. She planned the shopping. She stood in her kitchen, her floors, her stove, her curtain in her window, and she held on to all of it with both hands. She was not done. She was nowhere close to done. Daniel Hurst arrived on the afternoon stage 4 days later. He was younger than Abigail expected, perhaps 35, with wire-rimmed glasses and a leather satchel worn soft from use, and the particular focused energy of a man who moves through the world at a speed slightly faster than most people around him. He shook her hand without preamble, sat down at her center table, accepted a cup of coffee, and opened his satchel. "Nathan Cole wired me your situation," he said. "I've been reading lease law since Cheyenne. Tell me everything Caldwell said to you the day he handed you the key. Every word you can remember." She told him. He wrote without looking up. She told him about the terms, 4 months livable and profitable, by October 1st property reverts with no compensation. She told him about Martin Graves's visit, about the supply line pressure, about the Denver wire Percy had brought her. She told him about Ida Carroll's prepayment arrangement and the current state of her finances. She told him all of it in the same way she wrote in her journal facts sequence, no editorializing. When she finished, Hurst sat back and looked at his notes. "The Denver company is called Meridian Land and Commerce," he said. "I know them. They operate fast and they operate legally, which makes them harder to fight than the ones who cut corners." He tapped his pen on the paper. "However, there is a standard clause in Caldwell's lease template. I've seen it in 4 other properties. He's leased in this county that requires 60 days written notice to any existing tenant before a property transfer can be executed." Abigail looked at him. 60 days. "If that clause is in your lease," Hurst said, "the 10-day close is not enforceable against you. Meridian can buy the property, but they cannot transfer your tenancy or alter your terms for 60 days from the date of written notice." "Which they haven't given me," she said. "Which they have not given you," he said. "Do you have your copy of the lease?" She was up before he finished the sentence. She had the tin box open and the lease in her hand inside of 30 seconds. Hurst read it. He read it twice. He put his finger on a line near the bottom of the second page and turned it toward her. She read it. The clause was there. She sat down. She pressed both hands flat on the table. 60 days, she said again. 60 days, he said. Which takes you to, he calculated, December 3rd, well past your October 1st viability date. If you meet Caldwell's terms by October 1st and Meridian fails to provide proper written notice, your lease position is substantially strengthened. He closed his satchel. I'll draft a formal letter to Caldwell and to Meridian's Denver office today. That letter starts the clock and makes clear you are aware of your rights." She looked at him. "What are my chances?" I was quiet for a moment. Hearst, she was learning, was not a man who gave false comfort. "Reasonable," he said. "Not certain. Meridian has money and patience, and they will look for every angle. But the law is the law, and in this territory a tenant who knows the law and documents everything is considerably harder to remove than one who doesn't." "Then I'll know the law," she said. "And I'll document everything." "Good," he said. He stood. He picked up his satchel. "Nathan Cole is paying my fee, Miss Whitmore, before you object." He held up one hand, because she had already opened her mouth. "It was a condition of his wire to me," he said, and I'm quoting directly. "She will try to pay you herself, and she cannot afford it right now, and I can, so don't let her." She stared at him. "I find it's generally easier to follow Nathan Cole's instructions than to argue with them," Hearst said mildly. "He tends to have thought things through." She closed her mouth. "Thank you, Mr. Hearst," she said. "Thank me in December," he said. "Get me a room at the boarding house and feed me dinner, and I'll have those letters drafted by morning." She got him a room. She fed him dinner. She sat alone afterward in her kitchen and stared at the wall for a long time, turning the word 60 over and over in her mind, like a coin she was trying to identify. 60 days. She had 60 days. It was not a victory. It was a door held open by one hand. But she had learned coming west that one hand was enough to walk through. She went to bed before 10 and slept without dreaming for the first time in a week. The letters went out the next morning. By afternoon, Dust Creek knew. She had not told anyone except Nathan, but in a town of 300 souls, Hearst drafting legal letters at Mrs. Claremont's writing table was not something that stayed private. By the time she closed the kitchen at noon, Collins had already stopped by to say he'd heard she was fighting back. By 2 o'clock, Denny came in with 3 men from the logging camp who had never been to her kitchen before, sat down, ordered the full midday special, and left a coin each on the table over and above the price. "Word's getting around," Denny said, "about what Graves did, the supply lines." He looked at the table. "Some of us feel we could have done more." "You're here now," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. It was not a flood. It was not the sudden dramatic reversal that happened in stories where the tide turns all at once and the hero is vindicated in a single scene. It was smaller than that. Quieter. 3 people instead of 2. A table that had been empty on Thursdays filling up. Old Winifred arriving with her silk flower hat and bringing her niece, who brought her husband. The ranch hands from the East Fork, who had said they'd come back on Fridays, actually coming back on Fridays. The numbers moved. She watched them move and kept her head down and cooked, and did not let herself believe it was settled, because it wasn't settled, because a man with Graves's money and Meridian's patience could still find a way to make December impossible. She stayed ready. She stayed sharp. And then, on a Tuesday evening in late August, everything shifted in a direction she had not seen coming at all. Nathan was at her back table when Percy came in. It was after the dinner service. She had started serving a small evening meal 3 nights a week for the Carroll ranch hands who stayed in town overnight, and the room was nearly empty. Nathan had developed the particular habit of arriving in the last hour of whatever service she was running and sitting with a cup of coffee, while she finished up, not talking. Necessarily just present in the way that had become over the past weeks. One of the things she counted on without having formally acknowledged that she was counting on it. Percy came in fast. Too fast for someone who walked everywhere at a careful civil servant's pace. He stopped when he saw Nathan. "It's all right," Abigail said. "What is it?" "Martin Graves," Percy said. His voice was strange. "He had some kind of episode tonight. His housekeeper found him. Doc Mercer's there now." He paused. "It's his heart, they think." The room was quiet. Nathan looked at his coffee cup. His face showed nothing. Abigail stood very still. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough," Percy said. "Doc doesn't know yet. He's been in there 2 hours." Percy left. The silence that remained had a different quality from all the silences that had come before it in this room. Nathan spoke first. "You don't have to do anything," he said, quietly, not telling her what to do, just saying it, marking the space. She looked at the stove. She looked at the pot of broth she'd been keeping simmering for tomorrow's soup. She thought about Martin Graves, sitting backwards on a chair in her dining room with his pale eyes flat and his voice doing the calculations of her destruction. She thought about who she was. She went to the cupboard. She started pulling things down. "Abby," Nathan said. "I heard you," she said. "I'm not doing it for him." She made a pot of proper soup, not the broth she'd been saving, but a new pot started from scratch with the good stock and the pepper and the dried herbs she'd brought from Missouri. She made a plate of biscuits from the last of the day's flour. She wrapped everything carefully in cloth. Nathan watched her the whole time. When she was done, she picked up the bundle. "I'll come with you," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he said. He stood. They walked to Graves's house on the north end of Main Street. The housekeeper, a small gray woman named Agnes, who had the face of someone who had been worried for a very long time, answered the door and looked at Abigail and the bundle in her arms with an expression of pure bewilderment. "Miss Whitmore," Agnes said. "How is he?" Abigail said. "Stable," Agnes said. "Doc says he needs rest, weeks of it." She looked at the bundle again. "You came to bring him food." "I brought soup," Abigail said. "And biscuits. He might not want them, but they're here if he does." Agnes stared at her for a long moment. Her eyes had gone wet at the edges in the way old women's eyes do when they are moved and trying not to be. "He told Jessup not to sell to you," Agnes said. It came out like a confession. "I heard him. I should have said something." "It's all right," Abigail said. "It isn't," Agnes said. "No," Abigail agreed. "But it's done." She held out the bundle. "Make sure he eats when he's able." Agnes took it with both hands. Abigail turned. Nathan was standing one step behind her, hat in hand, watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Open somehow. The way a window looks when it's been opened after being shut a long time, not dramatic, just suddenly full of air that wasn't there before. They walked back in silence. Halfway down the street, Nathan said, "Why?" Not a question exactly, just the word. "Because I'm not him," she said. "And I never want to be." He walked beside her. After a moment he said, "You know that changes nothing legally. Graves is still, his interests are still." "I know," she said. "Meridian is still moving." "I know, Nathan." "So why?" he said again. And this time it was a real question, the underneath kind, the one that isn't about tactics or strategy, but about the core of a person, about what they're made of, when the situation removes every reason to be good, and they're good anyway. She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. "Because I came here to build something," she said. "Not just a kitchen, not just a business, something that's worth building. And a thing worth building has to be built on the right foundation, or it falls down." She looked at him steadily. "I don't want something I got by becoming someone I'm ashamed of. I'd rather lose it clean." He looked at her for a long time in the dark of the street, with the wind coming down off the ridge the way it always did, indifferent and cold and honest. "I had a partner once," he said, abruptly, the way he sometimes said things without lead-in, as though he had decided in the middle of a silence to open a door he'd had locked for a long time. "Man named Beaumont. We ran the ranch together for 4 years. I trusted him with everything. The accounts, the contracts, the negotiations with the land office." He paused. "He sold our water rights to a railroad company for personal payment, and didn't tell me until the debt called due and I couldn't pay it. Lost everything inside of 6 months." She was very still. "I spent 2 years after that being furious," he said. "At him, at the railroad, at everyone who'd watched it happen and said nothing. I thought if I was angry enough for long enough it would—" He stopped. "It didn't fix anything. It just made me someone I didn't recognize." He looked at her. "You're the first person since then who made me think about what I'd build if I started over, instead of what I lost." She held his gaze. "Nathan," she said softly. "I ain't good at this," he said. His voice was rougher, now lower. "Saying things. I never was. But I've been coming down off that ridge every day for 2 months, and I think—" He stopped again. He breathed. "I think you should know why." "Tell me," she said. "Because you're the most honest person I've met in 6 years," he said. "And because watching you fight for something that's yours, watching you refuse to quit when every sensible reason to quit was right there." He shook his head slightly. "I forgot that was possible. I needed to see it." She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved. "You come down from that ridge," she said, "and the first thing you think about is whether my stove is running right." "Yes," he said. "And I wake up at 4:30 every morning," she said, "and the first thing I think is whether you're going to come." He was very still. "Whether you're going to come," she said again quietly, "or whether today is the day you decide the ridge is enough." "It ain't," he said. "It hasn't been enough since the first morning." She breathed. He took one step toward her. Just one. The deliberate step of a careful man. She did not step back. I am not, she said, an easy thing to take on. "I know," he said. "I have a lease dispute and a land company in Denver, and a man recovering from a heart episode who may or may not decide to resume destroying me when he's well, and I have 20 ranch hands to feed 5 days a week, and a well casing that still needs to be finished." "I know all of that," he said. "And I am not going to change," she said. "I am not going to become someone smaller or simpler because it's more convenient." "Abby," he said. "What?" "I don't want smaller or simpler," he said. "I want exactly what's standing in front of me." She looked at him. He was telling the truth. She could read it in him, in the specific quality of his stillness, in the way he held his hat, in the fact that he was here in the street in the dark, saying this when 6 years of living alone had made silence his native language, and this was as far from silence as he knew how to go. She reached out and took his hand, not dramatically, just reached out and took it. The way you take the hand of someone you have decided to stop pretending you don't need. He closed his hand around hers. They stood there in the street for a moment. Then she said, "Walk me back." "Yes," he said. They walked back to her kitchen. He stayed while she banked the stove for the night. He stayed while she locked the front door. She made 2 cups of coffee they didn't really need, and they sat at the center table and talked. Really talked the way they hadn't quite done yet. The way that happens when 2 people who have been circling each other finally come to rest in the same place. He told her about the ranch. She told him about Missouri, about Gerald Finch, and his congregation wife, about her mother's scorekeeping, and her father's knife in the tin box, about Clara in Kansas, who had written twice asking Abby when she was going to do something sensible with her life. She made him laugh, really laugh, not the almost laugh she'd gotten before, but the real thing, low and surprised, as though it had caught him off guard. He told her he hadn't laughed like that since before Beaumont. She told him she was sorry. He told her not to be. It felt good. They were there until past midnight. When he finally stood to go, he held onto her hand a moment longer than necessary, in the way a person holds something they are not yet ready to put down. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. He left. She stood in her kitchen, her floors, her curtain, her stove, and she felt the specific fullness of a life that is still hard, and still uncertain, and still has a Denver land company moving against it, and a well casing to finish, and 20 ranch hands to feed in the morning. And also this. Also exactly this. The morning. Henry Caldwell had his accident. She was halfway through the breakfast service. She heard about it from Collins, who heard it from the liveryman. Caldwell had been climbing down from his wagon in his own yard and had missed the step and gone down hard on his left side. His hip possibly broken. His wrist definitely. He was at Doc Mercer's, which was a crowded establishment these days, and he was in considerable pain. Collins told her with the careful, neutral expression of a man who is not sure how the person he's telling is going to react. She kept her expression neutral too. She finished the service. She cleaned up. She sat at the back table and thought. Henry Caldwell had handed her a rusted key in front of 23 laughing people. He had given her impossible terms on a broken property because it amused him to watch her fail. He had listened to Martin Graves's plan and opened the door to Denver. He had been from the first morning a man whose comfort relied on her defeat. She knew all of that. She went to the cupboard. She made a second pot of soup. Nathan arrived at 11. He was spending more time in town, now had rented a room at the south end of Main Street, a fact that Dust Creek had received with great interest and much commentary that neither of them acknowledged publicly. He came through the back door, which he had taken to doing, and stopped when he saw the pot. "Who's that for?" he said. "Caldwell," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Abby." "I know," she said. "He brought Meridian here," he said. "He is the reason." "I know what he did," she said. She turned from the stove. "Nathan, when I walked into that broken house on the first day and everyone was laughing, do you know what I told myself?" He shook his head. "I told myself that the only thing I controlled was who I was going to be," she said. "Not what they did, not what they thought of me, just who I was going to be." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not changing that now because he's the one who's hurt. If I only act with decency toward people who deserve it, it isn't decency. It's just a transaction." Nathan looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "You're a better person than I am." "You're catching up," she said. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but something warmer than what had been there before. The expression of a man who is learning slowly that the world is not only the sum of its betrayals. "I'll carry it," he said. She handed him the pot. They walked to Doc Mercer's together. Henry Caldwell was propped up in a cot with his wrist bound and his face the color of old chalk. He looked at Abigail when she walked in with Nathan behind her and said nothing for a long moment. Just looked. She set the pot on the side table. She said, "Soup, biscuits in the cloth there. Doc will heat it when you're ready." Caldwell's jaw worked. "Why?" he said. The same word Nathan had used the night before in the street. The same underneath question. "Because you're hurt," she said, simply. He looked at her. His pale eyes, which had watched her with amusement and contempt across the street so many times, were different now. Not soft exactly, but stripped of the armor that contempt provides. "I signed the Meridian papers," he said. His voice was rough. "Last week, before—" "I know," she said. "It's done," he said. "I know that too," she said. "Mr. Hurst is handling it." Caldwell looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the wall with the studied neutrality of a man who has decided to let a thing play out without inserting himself. "You're fighting it," Caldwell said to Abigail. "I am," she said. He was quiet. "The clause," he said. "The 60-day clause. I forgot it was in there." She looked at him. "I drew those leases up years ago," he said. "Had a lawyer write them. I forgot that clause was still in there." He shifted slightly and winced. "Miss Whitmore, you don't need to," she said. "I'm going to anyway," he said. His voice was not comfortable. This was not comfortable for him. She could see that, and she did not make it more comfortable or less. She just let him have the space to do it. "I gave you that property because I thought it would be a quick lesson. Something to laugh about over the winter." He looked at his bound wrist. I didn't reckon on you." "No," she said. "Most people don't." He looked at her. "If I send a letter to Meridian," he said slowly, "withdrawing my endorsement of their acquisition, it won't unwind the contract entirely, but it'll create enough friction to slow them down. Give Hurst more to work with." She stared at him. She was very careful not to show too much on her face. Not because she wasn't feeling it, she was feeling a great deal, but because Henry Caldwell was not a man who would respond well to being seen doing something decent and having it made too large. "That would be helpful," she said. "Even. Steady." He nodded once. The nod of a man concluding a business that has cost him something. "There's a writing kit on the bureau," he said to Nathan. "Bring it here." Nathan brought it. Caldwell wrote the letter with his unbound hand, slowly in a cramped and effortful script. He signed it. He handed it to Abigail. She took it. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. He closed his eyes. "Get Hurst that letter and let me sleep." She and Nathan walked out into the mid-morning street. The letter was in her hand. She looked down at it. Nathan was watching her. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. She looked up at him. He was standing with his hat in his hands the way he did when he was feeling something he hadn't organized into words yet. "Is this what winning looks like?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "I've never seen it look like this before." She laughed. She didn't mean to. It came out of her sudden and clean, the laugh of someone who has been holding tension in her chest for so long that when it releases, it sounds almost like relief, almost like joy, almost like both at once. She folded the letter carefully. She put it in her apron pocket next to the place where the tin box usually sat. "Come have breakfast," she said. "I have biscuits from this morning that are still good." "You already closed service," he said. "I'll make an exception," she said. He put his hat on. He offered her his arm. Not with flourish, not with performance. Just offered it the way a man offers something when it seems like the right and natural thing. And she took it, and they walked back down Main Street together, in the late morning light, past the place where she had first stood, with a rusted key in front of 23 laughing people, past the fence she and Nathan had repaired with her hammer, and no permission past all of it. People saw them. People always saw everything in Dust Creek. Let them see, she thought. Let them see exactly this. She pushed open the door to her kitchen, her floor, her stove, her window, her curtain, her 60 days, and counting her fight. That wasn't over yet, and might not be for some time. She hung up her shawl. She put the coffee on. Nathan sat at the center table and watched her move through the room she had built out of nothing, and the expression on his face was one that he had never worn in 6 years on a ridge alone, quiet and full, and finally, carefully, something close to home. Hearst sent word from Cheyenne on a Friday morning. The letter arrived by Percy's hand. Percy, who had taken to delivering anything addressed to Abigail, personally, rather than leaving it at the general post. A small loyalty she had never asked for and quietly valued, and it was 3 pages long, dense with legal language she had to read twice to fully absorb. She read it at the center table with her coffee going cold beside her. Nathan was across from her. He had stopped pretending he had reasons to be in town, and had simply started being in town, and Dust Creek had reorganized its understanding of him accordingly. He watched her face while she read. She finished the 3rd page. She set it down. "Meridian withdrew," she said. He went still. Completely. Completely. She looked up at him. Hearst says Caldwell's letter combined with the 60-day clause made the acquisition legally complicated enough that Meridian's Denver office decided the property wasn't worth the friction. They have 3 other acquisitions in the territory. This one was, she looked at the letter again, described as not meriting continued resource allocation. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Not meriting continued resource allocation," he repeated. "That's what it says." "So they gave up," he said, "because fighting you cost more than you were worth to them." She looked at him. "When you say it like that." "It's the best kind of winning," he said. "When the other side decides you're more trouble than you're worth." Something lit in his eyes. "You wore them down, Abby. You just kept being there and they ran out of patience." She looked at the letter. She thought about the morning she had stood in front of 23 laughing people with a rusted key in her palm. She thought about the first night she'd cried into a pillow at Mrs. Claremont's boarding house, face pressed down so no one would hear. She thought about Percy's white face at her back door, about Graves sitting backwards on the chair, about Carver in the dark coat, who had come to assess her worth, and reported back that it was manageable. She thought about all the mornings she had gotten up at 4:30 and put the coffee on. "It's real," she said quietly. Not to Nathan, to herself. "It's actually real." "It's real," he said. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She breathed. She picked up her coffee, which was cold, and drank it anyway. "I need to send a letter to Clara," she said. "Your sister," he said. "She wrote me 3 months ago asking when I was going to do something sensible," she said. "I want to tell her I did something sensible." She paused. "Just not the kind she meant." Nathan Cole smiled. Fully. The real version, not the almost there flicker she'd cataloged over months, but the whole thing open and unhurried, the smile of a man who has remembered how to use it. She had not seen it before. Not like that. She stared at him for a moment longer than she intended. "What?" he said. Nothing, she said. I just nothing. He raised an eyebrow. You should do that more often, she said. Do what? That, she said. He understood. He looked away out the window with the expression of a man managing something that has surprised him. But he did not stop. She got up to make fresh coffee. The news moved through Dust Creek by noon. She did not know how she had told no one except Nathan, and Nathan had told no one. But by the time she started the midday service, the room had the specific energy of a place where people know something important has happened and are waiting for the person it happened to say it out loud. Collins said, "Heard Meridian pulled out." "You heard right," she said. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man who has been quietly rooting for something and is relieved not to have to hide it anymore. "Good," he said. "Just that. Good." It was enough. Denny came in with 4 men she didn't recognize and introduced them as hands from a ranch 20 miles east, who had made the trip specifically, he said, because he'd told them about the potato cakes and they'd called him a liar and he needed them to see for themselves. All 4 of them cleaned their plates. The tallest one said, "He wasn't lying, ma'am." It was somehow one of the finest professional compliments she had received. Elias Pratt arrived at his usual hour with Winifred in her silk flower hat and ordered coffee, and then with the casual authority of a man making an announcement that he has been planning for some time said, "I've been telling people about this place for 3 months. I expect the telling is going to get easier from here." "Thank you, Elias," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Bring me a second cup and thank me by continuing to make the soup the way you've been making it." She brought him the second cup. She was smiling when she walked back to the kitchen. Not the careful smile she wore during service, the managed professional warmth she had developed as a tool and a shield in equal measure. This was the other kind, the one that came from somewhere deeper and more unguarded, that she had been giving herself permission to feel more often since the night in the street when Nathan had taken her hand. She was learning slowly that allowing herself to feel good things did not make her less careful. It made her more accurate. The world looked clearer when you weren't spending all your energy bracing against it. Martin Graves came to the kitchen on a Wednesday in mid-September. She had not seen him since his heart episode. She had heard through the efficient network of Dust Creek's information that he was recovering slowly under protest, with very bad compliance with Doc Mercer's instructions about rest and diet. Agnes had apparently told Mrs. Claremont that he was a terrible patient. Mrs. Claremont had apparently told everyone else. He came in at 10, between the breakfast rush and the midday service when the room was empty. He moved more carefully than before. He was thinner, and the thinness made him look older. The way illness strips away the armor of ordinary health and shows the structure underneath. He sat at the center table. She brought him coffee without being asked. He looked at the cup. He looked at the room, the clean floors, the curtain, the 3 mismatched tables that were always full by 6:30. Now the board outside that people had told her they read every morning before deciding whether to come in, as if the menu were a kind of daily news. "Agnes says your soup is the best she's had," he said. "Agnes is very kind," Abigail said. "Agnes doesn't say things she doesn't mean," he said. She sat down across from him. She had decided without quite deciding that this was a conversation she would have, sitting down at the same level as equals, not standing behind the counter, not maintaining the professional distance of proprietor to customer. That era was over. Whatever this was, it was something else. "How are you feeling?" she said. He looked at her with the expression she had seen on Henry Caldwell's face in Doc Mercer's office, that stripped-back look of a man whose usual armor has been removed by circumstances he didn't choose. "Like a man who nearly died," he said. "Which I understand is considered educational." "I imagine so," she said. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I owe you an accounting." "You don't," she said. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "I bought your supply lines. I sent Carver to assess this property for acquisition. I sat in that chair." He nodded at the chair he'd turned backwards all those weeks ago. "And told you that you were making a mistake." He looked at her directly. "I tried to end this place." "Yes," she said. "You're still here," he said. "Yes," she said. "And I nearly died," he said. And you sent soup. She held his gaze and said nothing. He looked at his cup. I don't know what to do with that, he said. A person in my position doesn't generally. That's not the kind of thing that happens to people like me. Maybe it should happen more often, she said. Not unkindly, just honestly. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same territory. Agnes said the same thing. He looked up. I'm discontinuing my agreement with Jessup. You'll be able to purchase supplies freely from next week. She looked at him. I'm also, he said more slowly, going to need a cook for the saloon dining room. My previous arrangement the quality has been poor for some time, and I've been too proud to admit it. He met her eyes. I'm not asking you to come work for me. I know better than that. But if you ever had interest in a wholesale arrangement, baked goods, soups, that kind of thing, I'm prepared to pay fair market, and I'll put it in writing. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the morning she had walked out of his dining room offer and stood in her kitchen and said no out loud to nobody. She thought about what no had cost her and what it had built. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. He stood carefully. He left money for the coffee more than it cost, as Ida Carroll had done months ago, as though the extra was an apology in the only language businessmen knew. He walked to the door. He stopped. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Graves. He didn't turn around. He looked at the door. That was a hard thing you did. Coming here. Staying. He paused. Most people would have left. I know, she said. Why didn't you? He said. She thought about it. The real answer, not the simple one. Because I've spent my whole life being told what I'm not suited for, she said. And I decided a long time ago that the people doing the telling don't get to be right just because they're louder than I am. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked out. She sat at the center table in the quiet room with her hands in her lap and the autumn light coming through her curtain, and she thought, it doesn't mean it's over. None of this means it's over. There will be another problem and another month of tight margins and another person who decides I'm the easiest obstacle to remove. She thought, and I will still be here. Nathan proposed on a Thursday evening in October. Not with ceremony. Not with anything she would have predicted, because nothing about him operated the way she would have predicted, which was one of the things she had come to understand as fundamental to who he was and who they were together. He had spent the day helping the well casing contractor finish the work on the waterline work that was now fully paid for from her own earnings, a fact she had told him about on a Monday morning with a specific satisfaction that she did not try to hide, and he came in at the end of it with the look of a man who has made a decision somewhere in the middle of a practical task and is ready to say it out loud. She was at the back counter finishing the prep for tomorrow's service. She heard him come in. She heard him sit down. She heard the particular quality of a silence that has something in it. She turned around. He was sitting at the center table with his hat on the chair beside him, and his hands folded on the table in front of him, and he was looking at her with an expression so direct and unguarded that it stopped her mid-motion. Nathan, she said. What is it? I bought land, he said. She put down what she was holding. What land? Quarter-mile north of here, he said. Bordering the Carroll Ranch. Good water. Good grazing. Previous owner moved east last spring, and it's been sitting empty. He looked at his hands. I've been thinking about it for 6 weeks. I put the offer in Monday. The answer came today. She crossed the room slowly. She sat down across from him. You bought a ranch, she said. The land, he said. I'd build the ranch. He looked up at her. I want to build it. She understood suddenly the full weight of what he was saying. This was not a man buying property. This was a man who had spent 6 years on a ridge because staying in one place had cost him everything. Deciding to stay in one place again. Deciding that the thing worth risking it for was here. Was this town. Was her. Nathan, she started. I know it's fast, he said. He was not a man who spoke quickly, and he was not speaking quickly now, but she could hear the effort of saying this, the specific courage it required from someone whose native language was silence. I know we've known each other less than 6 months. I know you've got this place and you've built it yourself, and you don't need anyone's ranch beside you to make it work." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking because you need it. I'm asking because I—" He stopped. He breathed. "I want to come home to something that's worth coming home to. And the only thing that has felt worth coming home to in 6 years is you." The room was very quiet. The stove made its small ticking sound. The curtain moved in the draft from the window she'd left open. Everything was the same and completely different. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly and take the time and not rush you into anything. But I also want you to know, I want you to know where I'm headed, what I'm building toward." He looked at her steadily. "I'm building toward you." I wanted to say it out loud. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Gerald Finch and his congregation wife. She thought about every person who had told her what she was not suited for. She thought about the rusted key and the broken door, and the first morning she had lit the stove and felt the foundation being laid. She thought about a man on a ridge watching a woman pick up a ceramic birdhouse in the dirt and deciding quietly that she was worth coming down for. "You already are home," she said. He went very still. "You've been home since the fence boards," she said. "I just didn't know how to tell you yet." He reached across the table and took her hand the same way she had taken his in the street, simply without performance. The way you take something you have already decided belongs with you. "Then yes," he said. "Then yes," she said. He exhaled. The exhale of a man releasing 6 years of held breath. She squeezed his hand. "Finish your coffee," she said. "I'm going to make dinner." "You've been cooking all day," he said. "I know," she said. "This is different." She stood. She went to the kitchen. She cooked the way she cooked when it meant something specific, not the efficient economical service cooking she had mastered out of necessity, but the other kind, the kind her mother had taught her, the kind that took time and attention and care, and that said through the food itself something that words would have taken longer to reach. Nathan sat at the center table and listened to her work, and did not offer to help, and did not leave, and did not speak, because he understood by now the language of her kitchen, that the sounds of it were their own kind of conversation, and that being there for it was enough. They ate together. They talked until late. He walked home through the dark of October, and she stood at her window and watched the shape of him until the street swallowed him, and she felt the specific fullness of a life that is not finished being built, that is in fact only just beginning to show its actual shape. The morning of October 1st came in cold and bright. The deadline. Caldwell's deadline, the one she had been working toward since June. The one she had held in her mind like a fixed star, livable and profitable by October 1st. She was at the stove by 4:30, same as always. She made the coffee. She started the first batch of biscuits. She looked at the room around her, her floors, her repaired walls, her curtain, her center table, with the 3 mismatched chairs, and she did a mental accounting the way she did every morning. The well casing was finished. The roof was solid. She had 62 regular customers across her breakfast and midday services. The carol arrangement had been extended for the winter season at Ida's initiative, and at a better rate. Graves's wholesale proposal sat on her back counter in writing signed and dated, waiting for her decision. Her reserve of cash was the largest it had ever been, not comfortable, not safe in the way she wanted eventually to be safe, but real, present, built by her own hands from nothing. She was livable. She was profitable. She was here. When Collins came in at 6:30, he looked at her and said, "October 1st. "October 1st, she agreed. He raised his coffee cup. She raised hers. They drank. Elias arrived at 7, with Winifred, and 3 people she didn't recognize, who turned out to be Winifred's grandchildren, visiting from Laramie, who had been told Winifred's word, delivered with great dignity, that they were not leaving Dust Creek without eating at least one breakfast here. The youngest one, a girl of perhaps 12, looked around the dining room with wide eyes and said, "Is this your place?" "It is," Abigail said. "Did you build it yourself?" "Most of it," she said. The girl looked at the curtain in the window. "I like the curtain," she said. "Thank you," Abigail said. "I made it myself." The girl looked at her with the frank assessment children apply to adults they find genuinely interesting. "How?" she said. "I'll tell you while you eat," Abigail said. She brought the girl a biscuit. She told her about the 10-cent remnant from the dry goods store and the needle and thread she'd packed in her tin box, and the first morning she'd hung it, and how the light had come through it and made the room look like something. The girl ate her biscuit and listened. Nathan arrived at 8 and sat at the back table, which was his table now in the understanding of everyone who came here, and ordered eggs and the hash and drank his coffee watching her work the room. She caught his eye once across the full and noisy breakfast service over the heads of all those people who had come and kept coming and would keep coming, and something passed between them that was not a word and did not need to be. She went back to the kitchen. She started the next order. Chapeg. The last twist came in November, and it came from Denver. Hearst sent word. A letter again, 3 pages dense and careful, and this time she read it standing at the back counter with Nathan beside her, because she had decided consciously and deliberately that the era of reading difficult news alone was over. Meridian Land and Commerce had not simply withdrawn from the Caldwell property acquisition. They had filed a complaint with the Territorial Land Office about what they described as irregular lease practices by Henry Caldwell in Dust Creek. Specifically lease terms that contained hidden clauses and inconsistent transfer provisions that had created legal exposure for Meridian in their acquisition attempt. The Territorial Land Office was investigating. Several other Caldwell properties in the county were now under review, and in the course of that investigation, a secondary finding had emerged: Caldwell's original lease on the Greer property. Abigail's property contained a provision buried in the 3rd page that Hearst had identified in his initial reading and flagged for further analysis. A provision that stated if the tenant improved the property to a viable commercial standard within the lease period, and if the landlord had failed to disclose known structural deficiencies at the time of lease signing, which Caldwell had in fact done, regarding the well casing and the roof, the tenant held right of first purchase at assessed value. She had the right to buy her kitchen. She read that sentence 4 times. Nathan was reading over her shoulder. She felt the moment he reached the same sentence. She felt him go still. Hearst knew this was in there, she said. He flagged it in the 2nd week, Nathan said. His voice was carefully controlled. He told me. He said he wanted to be certain before he told you, because he didn't want to give you a hope that didn't materialize. She turned and looked at him. You knew. For 3 weeks, he said. Abby, I'm sorry he asked me not to say anything until... Nathan. She looked at him steadily. How much is the assessed value, he told her. She did the arithmetic. The reserve she had built. The Carroll extension. The Graves wholesale arrangement she had finally 2 weeks ago accepted and signed. I can do it, she said, quietly. With the specific calm of a woman who has been moving towards something for so long that arriving at its edge feels less like surprise and more like recognition. I can buy it. Yes, he said. It'll take everything I have, she said. Yes, he said. And then I'll have to start the reserve again from nothing. Yes, he said. She looked at him. My ranch land borders Carroll property, he said. Which means it borders the supply route into town. I've been talking to a man in Laramie about cattle. If I run a small herd next season, and if I sell direct to you, rather than through the market, your food costs drop by roughly 1/3. She stared at him. You planned this, she said. I planned ahead, he said. The distinction his expression said was important to him. She looked at the letter in her hands. She looked around the room, her room that she had built with her hands and her money, and her refusal to leave, that had started as a joke and become a thing. People rode 40 miles, for that had been the target of 2 men's contempt and a Denver Land Company's calculation, and had outlasted all of it. I want to buy it, she said. I know, he said. Today, she said. Hearst is in Cheyenne, he said. But he can have the papers ready by Monday. Monday, she said. She set the letter down. She took a breath that was large enough to feel. And then she went to the door and opened it and turned the sign, the small wooden sign Nathan had made for her in September, that said in his careful lettering, Whitmore's Kitchen Open, and she looked out at the main street of Dust Creek, Wyoming, on a cold November morning. Dust Creek looked back at her. A woman she didn't recognize was reading her menu board outside. She watched the woman read it, consider, and turn toward the door. "Good morning," Abigail said. "Come on in, coffee's on." The woman smiled and came in. Abigail held the door for her. She looked once more at the street, at the place where she had stood with 23 laughing people and a rusted key at the fence she had repaired at the town that had tried to be done with her before she had started, and she felt something settle in her chest. Something final and solid and wholly her own. She went inside. She let the door close behind her. Nathan was at the center table. Elias was in his corner chair. Collins had just come in with the fourth man he always brought on Mondays. Percy from the telegraph office was hanging up his coat. Winifred would arrive at 7 with or without grandchildren depending on the week. The Carroll hands would come at noon. They would all come. They kept coming. She went to the kitchen. She put the next batch of biscuits in. She had a full house to feed and a deed to sign on Monday, and a ranch being built a quarter-mile north by a man who thought about her stove first thing every morning, and a letter to write to Clara in Kansas that was going to be deeply satisfying to compose. She had a life, not the life that had been offered to her. Not the life that was considered suitable for a woman of her size and her station, and her particular set of limitations, as defined by people who had never once asked her what she was capable of. Her life, built by her own hands, on her own foundation, from nothing, from a rusted key and a broken door and a burned kitchen and the absolute refusal to let anyone else decide what she was worth. She checked the stove. She checked the coffee. She straightened her apron. And Abigail Whitmore, the girl they had laughed at, the woman they had tried to starve out and buy out and wait out, the person nobody in Dust Creek had reckoned on, went out to take the next order. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She always had been. They had just been too small in their imagining to see it.